First of all, thank you very much for accommodating me online. I've just come back today from Washington, where I was at International Belmarsh Tribunal for Julian Assange in the National Press Club yesterday, which was a huge event, very well attended, and very, very powerful speakers, including Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg spoke there, who, of course, himself has suffered greatly from exposing things to do with the US establishment. The power of the event was to try and raise support for Julian Assange in the United States, as well as obviously by doing it online in Australia and other places. And I think, did that quite successfully. I just appeal to this audience here that the Assange campaign is going to take a long time. Of that, I'm convinced. There are essentially two paths to it. One is the incredibly complicated series of legal arguments that are pursued all the time, and the issue is back in court again next month. I don't think there's any real need to go into the reeds and weeds of the legal arguments at the moment. I think everyone here fully understands the issue is that Julian Assange is threatened under the Espionage Act in the USA, which carries a 175-year mandatory sentence if he's found guilty on trial in the USA. He can only be expedited to the USA if all legal processes are exhausted in Britain, including access to the European Court of Human Rights and the decision of the Home Secretary. So political support is very, very important, and that's what we want to do, is mobilize it. And the purpose of my visit was to try to encourage members of Congress and the Senate, as well as political activists in the USA, to do everything they can on Assange. And we will continue doing all of that work. And I'm sure everyone there will do everything they can to support this campaign. It's pretty fundamental. He exposed the war crimes in Abu Ghraib. He exposed the war crimes in Afghanistan. He's exposed the activities of multinational capital, and he is paying a fundamental price. And if he is imprisoned, then every other journalist around the world will think not twice, not three times, but 10 times before they publish anything that might fall foul of the wishes of the security services of the United States, or indeed any other country under this process. So please do all you can on that. I just want to mention, if I may, two other things before I come on to the issues of the Ukraine. I think we need to look very carefully at the issues of the economy of this country. We obviously are fighting back on wages, conditions, and so on railways, mail, teachers, health workers, and this campaign is a very important one. But we've also got to look at overall economic expenditure. Defence spending is now at 2% of GDP. The government has an aspiration to rise it to 3%, which would put us amongst the highest spenders on arms anywhere in the world. They're also continuing this idea of a global role for Britain in the world, with aircraft carriers patrolling the China Sea. The Australia, UK, USA pact will increase arms demands, and the obvious dangers of getting into conflict from that, but also the enormous levels of expenditure and the pressure the arms trade brings to policy making and to government. And so through the Peace and Justice Project, we're producing a international book very shortly. It's in writing, or final writing stage at the moment, on the global arms trade, the influence it has, the pressure it has. But of course, linked to that has to be the alternatives of how we go into a process of arms conversion and use the incredible skills that are there in the manufacture of weaponry, aircraft, and surface vehicles, use those skills to do other things and other economic development, particularly sustainable energy and sustainable products in manufacturing. So I do think we need to build into all of this a sense of creative thinking about how we do things. And the conference today, I hope, is at least thinking on those things. the last thing I want to say, because I understand that time is very short and we're running out of it, is the horrors of the war in Ukraine. Well, first off, be clear, Russia is wrong in the war in Ukraine. That Russia should not be invading Ukraine. I think pretty well everybody would agree with that. The consequences of all this have been millions of people, refugees, leaving Ukraine and going to neighbouring countries. And the consequences have been many people have been killed in the Ukraine, and a great deal of damage has been done. And a very large number of conscripted Russian soldiers have also been killed in this whole process. This war could go on and on and on. It could be a war of attrition in which higher quantities and higher caliber weaponry is supplied to Ukraine. Russia will respond in kind and will develop into a hotter and hotter war on the borders of Ukraine and Russia, with, of course, the danger of the whole thing spilling over into either into Russia itself or into other countries. And so there has to be, in my view, a recognition that we either watch the almost First World War style of warfare going on, which will lead to the destruction of so much in Ukraine, or we look for peace in some way. The UN failed to intervene when it should and could have done much earlier on, in my view, to try and bring about some kind of negotiations between Russia and the Ukraine. Secondly, having not done that, they've sort of stood by, and whilst they did intervene at one point on Mariupol, and they have encouraged Turkey to host the talks about grain supplies going through the Black Sea, which is, of course, good and welcome. But that indicates to me that if Russia and Ukraine are capable of talking to each other about grain supplies, then they should be capable of talking to each other about other things. So the question then is, who is going to promote this? Now, I was very interested in the views that many people gave to me in Washington, that there is a very strong body of opinion in the USA, particularly amongst the faith community, but others as well, that believe that there is a possibility of starting some kind of dialogue process. And now that process could be inspired from the UN, but I think it's more likely to come from elsewhere. And I'm very impressed with the stance that Lula and others have taken in Latin America, where they haven't actually said a great deal in any partisan way about this particular war, but they have said that they're concerned about it. Now, it may well be that could be some kind of initiative come from there, or could come from African countries who themselves, of course, dependent very much on importing grain from both Russia and the Ukraine. So it is important that we make that call. We make that call for negotiations. Otherwise, the war will just drag on, more people will be killed, and of course the danger of escalation when you have a huge supply of nuclear weapons in Russia and of course within NATO countries. And then that calls into question the wider alliances that we have and the policy of NATO expansion up to the Russian border. We had the opportunity in the 1990s to go through a process of disarmament and detente. We had that process. We have the opportunity through the Global Ban on Nuclear Weapons treaty that the UN has inspired. We just need to move forward on these things in peace. And so a trade union conference on peace is about looking at the wider issues, but it's also looking at the security of jobs. And I'll just finish with this, that if we go into a process of arms conversion, which I want to do, and I'm sure many in the conference there would want to do that, it also has to be about job security and job guarantees. That requires public investment to make sure that that happens. I'll stop there because I know you're running behind time, but just thank you very much for holding the conference, and thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words to you this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Thank you. Well done, man.